We're now live, Chair.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of Cabinet, which is being held remotely and live streamed due to the work from home guidance and the high number of coronavirus cases at the moment. So before we start, I think I should explain how this meeting will operate. Because whilst this is a meeting Cabinet, there will be no decisions formally taken by Cabinet on the report presented, as that's not permitted within Schedule 12 of the Local Government Act 1972. Cabinet will consider the reports in the normal way, together with any additional comments made by Cabinet members, other council members, and so on. Having done that, Cabinet will indicate its position on the report and recommendations, knowing that all the executive decisions required will subsequently be taken by the Chief Executive under the delegated authority powers already given him within the Council's Constitution. These decisions will be published in the normal way, and a report of the decisions taken will be submitted to the next meeting of Cabinet. All non-executive matters, that's those that require a decision by full Council, will be capable of being recommended to Council in the normal way. So that's the advice I've been given by Head of Legal and Democratic Services about how this meeting should operate, and I hope that that's clear and understood. The second item I want to say before we move in onto the formal business is, as certainly members and officers will be aware, that some 2 years ago the Council discussed at the Governance and Business Committee arrangements for parental leave for councillors. Councillor Wilkinson will be taking 8 weeks of parental leave commencing a week today, and I'm therefore notifying members that I appointed Councillor Courtney will be joining Cabinet from today for a 9-week period as acting lead member for Children and Young People's Services. And I'm pleased to welcome Sarah onto the meeting this evening. So item 1 is apologies for absence. I think all Cabinet members are present, so I don't have any. Item 2 is members' interests, to remind members to declare any interests. Yes, Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, Leader. I must declare a non-pecuniary interest in item 15, as my husband is the voluntary secretary of the Community Land Trust.
Thank you, Jane. As we've agreed, you'll turn your camera and microphone off and not participate in that item. Thank you. Any other items of interest, remind members to declare them as and when they arise on the agenda. Item 3, admission of the public. There is one item which is being taken below the line, and that relates to item 21, Halifax Leisure Centre project delivery. That's because of the financial and business affairs included in the report. That's exempt for the reasons that are set out on the agenda paper. So can I just ask colleagues to check that they're happy with me, that they're happy that that item is taken below the line? Thank you. Nods and approval. Item 4 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of December. Can I ask whether we're happy those are a correct record? Seeing that proposed and seconded, we're happy to agree those. So item 5 is question time. I've had notice of a number of questions that have been submitted by members of the public. These will be read out by Ian Hughes, Head of Legal, and Cabinet members will either provide a brief summary or explain why a more detailed written report will be given, or possibly indeed both. And the first question is from David Wager, and Ian, could I ask you to read that out, please?
Thank you, Leader. Mr. Wager asks, or states to start with, I understand the Council is in the process of drafting a document proposing changes to the Community Infrastructure Levy. to address the need for building developers to fund local infrastructure for places in which they receive contracts from Calderdale Council. Is this correct? If correct, could I request an update on the current progress on this document? If correct, could the council give an estimate of when the document will be completed and implemented if appropriate? Is it the council's intention to apply the community infrastructure levy to current proposals for building projects under the local development plan? Is it the council's intention to prioritise expenditure of the proceeds of the community infrastructure levy in areas where the developments have taken place or about to take place? And finally, specifically, will the levy be applicable to the house build development at Hawley Green? Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Jane, Councillor Scullion, ask you to respond to that.
Thank you, and I apologise in advance. There are some technical things in my answer. I won't go into all of the detail, but I will provide Mr. Wager with a full written response. In brief, the council submitted a community infrastructure levy draft charging schedule to the Secretary of State for independent examination back in January 2019. And it has been examined as it is part of the overall examination of the local plan. However, the local plan examination has first priority. And so the community infrastructure levy part of that examination is not yet being concluded. It is not likely that the community infrastructure levy part of this is going to be implemented until 2023, I'm afraid. And in answer to another part of Mr. Wager's question, the community infrastructure levy cannot be applied retrospectively to developments. So it wouldn't be going to any developments that have got planning permission at the point before the point of adoption. So the applicability of it in the future is dependent on when precisely it gets through and what has been agreed at that point. However, I must emphasise that developments are still subject to contributions under Section 106, which many members will be more familiar with. So that covers things like affordable housing, education, extra requirements, open space and biodiversity. The community infrastructure levy in the future can be used to fund a very wide range of infrastructure, including transport, flood defences, schools, hospitals, sports facilities, academies, free schools, district heating schemes, and so on. And we look forward to that coming to full implementation. However, as I say, Section 106 is still very much in place. And I should mention in particular, in relation to the last part of Mr. Wager's question about the Hawley Green development, and clearly that has not moved on to the site investigation stage. And some of you will remember in the discussions about that project that Together Housing Association indicated that it was very willing to look at whether part of that site could be retained for community amenity. And they will continue to work with the council and in due course local residents to look at what the opportunities are for that. But I will provide Mr. Wager with the full technical answer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The second question is from Emily Stead. Ian.
Thank you, Leader. Emily Stead says, recently the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, several government departments and local councils have left the Stonewall Diversity Champion Scheme due to concerns about value for money and their misinterpretation of equality law to members of that scheme. With this in mind, can the council confirm whether or not their internal policies have been reviewed and whether they still think paying £2,500 per year to Stonewall for misleading policy advice is appropriate given the budget constraints on local authorities? Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Ian. I think Councillor Dake is going to reply to that one. Sylvia.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And thank you, Emily, for your question on this complex and difficult issue. As I'm aware that you've had a reply already to the email that you sent on this topic, but I'll ensure that you also received a formal answer to your question. Just today, meanwhile, I can confirm that we work with a number of organisations to support our commitment to the Equality Act. And when the decision as to whether or not to renew the subscription to Stonewall came to Cabinet, we took account of the views of the LGBT staff group on the council, and we gave careful consideration to the question, and we decided to renew for 1 year. In a year's time, we'll look again at the subscription and review it thoroughly as we did on this occasion. But as I say, the full reply will be sent to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia. The third question, I believe, is from Nikki Kelly. Ian.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Nikki Kelly says, further to my question asked at Cabinet on the 4th of October 2021, excuse me, regarding the Homefield hum, at which time the verbal response was that investigations were continuing. In addition, there was a meeting scheduled for 13th November 2021 between Environmental Health and elected members to discuss the issue. In light of the ongoing noise disturbance and the impact this is having on residents' mental health, please can Cabinet advise what further investigations have taken place, what were the results of these investigations, and what was the outcome of the meeting between Environmental Health and elected members? Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Lynn, Jenny, I think this falls in your area.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Kelly, for your question. The situation, I will make sure that you have a written reply to this, but I can tell you at this stage that we believe, officers believe, that there are three possible sources of noise nuisance which are in the process of being investigated. We continue to respond to any specific complaints of noise, whether it's in relation to Homefield or anywhere else, because we have a duty to do that and to exercise due diligence. I think people will be aware that low frequency noises can be particularly difficult to trace the source to, but the work is ongoing. And our officers are in touch with everybody who has expressed concern. But I thank you for your question, and we will make sure that a response is given to you in writing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. The next is from Michael Bradley.
Thank you, Leader. Michael Bradley asks, regarding the proposed new leisure centre for Halifax, what other sites have been considered for this new facility? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scullion, Jane, I think you were going to respond to this one.
Thank you. I have had a chance this afternoon to speak to officers, and I understand that a feasibility study was carried out in 2015, which looked at 3 site options. And these were: option 1, demolish existing Northbridge Leisure Centre and build completely new facility. Option 2, retain Northbridge Leisure Centre and remodel and refurbish the centre. And this would include the incorporation of a new wet-side facility. And option 3, demolish existing Cow Green multi-storey car park and build new wet and dry leisure facility. The study also considered at a high level whether any alternative sites were available in town which met the project's needs, and this was not considered viable at the time. I wasn't a councillor then, but I can also reassure Mr. Bradley that in discussions over the last 2 years, we have also at a high level looked at other possibilities in terms of sites, but nothing was considered to be viable. But I will provide him with a written answer.
Thank you, Jane. And the final one is from Anthony Ray. Ian.
Thank you, Leader. Mr. Ray says, Sunday, 30th of January is the 3rd anniversary of Calderdale's declaration of climate emergency in 2019. Like other Friends of the Earth groups across West Yorkshire, we have prepared an audit submitted with this question of what progress has been made in the 3 years since to plan for the nearly 50% reduction in the district's carbon emissions from 1.6 million to 0.56 million tonnes annually that has to be achieved in just 9 years by 2030. The audit identifies both positive and negative developments, but on balance finds that action so far has been inadequate. The principal local reason for this finding is that the council's emerging local plan is not reinforcing, but instead undermining its climate emergency strategy. Does the leader of the council and the cabinet member responsible for climate agree with Friends of the Earth that more urgent action needs to be taken at Calderdale, West Yorkshire and national levels to accelerate decarbonisation? The district reduction of nearly 50,000 tonnes a year is required. And in particular, will the council agree to commission a review as to how the schizophrenia between its local development and decarbonisation strategies can be overcome so as to prevent ever more destructive incompatibilities emerging across the 2020s? Thank you. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Ian. Of course, give careful consideration to all the details in the points that that Mr. Ray has made. But Scott, do you want to give an immediate response?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, and as you've said, of course, we'll provide a full written response to that. I entirely agree with Mr. Ray's comments about the need for urgent need for action on a national, regional, and borough-wide basis. I think the fact is at the moment is we are looking towards national and WICA policy to help us achieve our goals, and it is going to be a key factor in us getting there. Really interested and to understand how the appraisal and audit process was done, and I look forward to perhaps learning a little bit more about that and how they've perhaps benchmarked that against other local authorities and, as stated, other West Yorkshire local authorities. Mr. Ray might be aware there are other bits on the agenda this evening: green and healthy streets and a paper about public sector decarbonisation. So there is a lot more than perhaps your paper first suggested. However, I think the elements around the local plan are an important indicator. I guess it depends how you look at that. One might argue we are creating a place where we keep people within Calderdale, cut down on emissions, and create a stronger sense of place for those living here. Clearly, housing in the UK is only 1.5% of coverage, which is less than we have when the tide goes out. So there is space. It's important we protect our green spaces in Calderdale. But I do think, yeah, we need to do more. We've got the emission reduction pathway and we're doing the action plan after that. And I think that's the right way around. And I know, Anthony, you're a key part of driving that process. So as we said, I think we'll provide you a full written answer, and it'd be really nice to have an offline conversation with you about this as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Scott. So that concludes all the questions that I've had notice of for this evening. So I'll move us on to the main agenda items and take us on to item 6, which is concerned with the right piece of my agenda, developing a strategic plan for North Halifax. This is a report that's been drawn together and contributed to by all of the different council directorates. I'll introduce it briefly and assume that members have read the report. Once I've introduced it, I'll ask if any other cabinet members want to comment on it. I then had requests from Councillor Riveron and Councillor Baker to comment on this report. Members will remember that over 4 or 5 years, we've really done a lot of work about developing partnerships around our town centres. And that's been an important piece of work in terms of positioning ourselves, I think shown its benefits with some of the successful funding bids that there's been for various town schemes or the awards of funding that have followed. Clearly, communities of North Halifax don't fit neatly within that kind of town centres framework. The two communities who make up the wards of Ovenden and Illingworth and Mixenden, distinct neighbourhoods, have a lot in common, represent a significant proportion of the population of Halifax, and they share many similarities, particularly a very strong sense of community spirit. But they're also areas that have significant challenges and include some of the most deprived areas in the borough. The health and well-being in those areas has been particularly negatively impacted by the COVID pandemic, which has further exacerbated some of the underlying issues and has also added to pressures on local services. As the report sets out, there are actually quite a lot of different schemes either planned or underway within the North Halifax area, ranging from the recently completed improvements at Beechwood Road Library, schemes to improve walking and cycling, other proposals around green spaces, and moving to the construction phase of the Mixenden hub. There are also a number of potential development sites in the area as well. What's perhaps lacking sometimes is the coordination to make sure that there's a coherence about these schemes and to bring them together to make sure they're having the maximum impact. And that's one of the aims of this report and why there's a proposal for some coordination funding within this. So firstly, to coordinate and enhance the impact of these works through seeing them as a more coherent scheme. Secondly, to do more work to build on resident and community involvement in these and provide a greater sense of community leadership and community ownership. And thirdly, to make sure that we're better positioned for future funding bids for investment and developments that might benefit these areas. I think perhaps the other strand is recognizing that what people most need in these communities is access to good health, access to opportunities for skills, and many of those things are not just about physical buildings, but they're also about making sure that we're getting the maximum impact out of schemes designed to support those areas, and particularly perhaps making sure that some of the targeted programs at West Yorkshire level around skills training, for example, really are being made accessible and creating opportunities for those areas. So that's the reason this report tries to bring those things together and proposes, a fairly modest level of investment in coordination and community support to help to take those forwards. I'll check first of all if any other cabinet colleagues want to add anything or add any comments on this at this point. Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, Leader. I think I said at the last Place Scrutiny Committee that in terms of finding external funding for initiatives that we want to have to improve the lives of people in Calderdale is one of our key jobs these days. We perhaps sometimes hark back to the old Yorkshire Forward days when you could basically look at a place and see where funding was needed, and you could negotiate with the civil servants for that to be forthcoming. The situation now is that very often there are competitions, government-sponsored competitions to bid against other councils for particular improvement works of one kind or another. And we've just had some of that in terms of some large infrastructure projects. One of the things I think this paper is intended is to, well, two of the things. One is to basically give us additional capacity in terms of learning how to play this new game that we find ourselves in terms of where you get public sector funds to improve the lot of residents in the area. So it's improving capacity in relation to that. And we know that in terms of our top 6 index of multiple deprivation, we know what those are in Calderdale. We've got Park first, then we've got Ovenden, then we've got Town, then we've got Illingworth and Mixenden, then we've got Worley, then we've got Todmorden. We know that Todmorden's had the Towns Fund money. We know that Park and Worley have begun in terms of the inclusive economy skills work to begin to build a base there in terms of future bridgehead to other work in those areas. But that does leave Ovenden and Illingworth and Mixenden in particular, and a bit of town, Booth, as having nothing really specifically focused upon them. So that's a start in relation to that. The other thing is that we realise that government are not quite so interested in the smaller projects, and some of those projects are small. So one of the things that we're looking to do is basically how we can get officers to think about aggregating projects and to not work in silos, but to work across directorates in terms of putting things together in a way that actually fits the criteria for these various bids and funding streams. So this is simply a start, but I think what it does do is give us more leverage in terms of developments for the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jane. Councillor Wilkinson, then Councillor Lynn.
Thank you. Yeah, I just really want to welcome this paper, really. I think it's a really important paper for the people of North Halifax. And I think it's not just, I mean, as Councillor Scullion points out, it's not just the council really that has had a focus on towns and sustainable towns. It's really been a focus of the government's levelling up agenda as well. I think a lot of the funding, it's been capital funding, and it has been based predominantly in towns. And I think, you know, if we're not careful, you know, we're going to see a lot of places like North Halifax left behind in terms of not getting that level of funding. And inevitably, as a council, when we have the sort of levels of funding that we've seen going into places like Brighouse, Elland and Todmorden, you end up with a lot of officer time and resources sucked into those particular areas. And I think it's really important for us, because as a cabinet, we've said that tackling deprivation and inequality are a priority for us. I think we really need to make sure that we retain a strong focus on North Halifax and areas such as that as well. So yes, I really welcome this. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Jenny?
Thanks, thanks, Jay. Yes, I really welcome the paper as well. And I guess the only point I wanted to add is really kind of to pay tribute to some of the work of officers in my own directorate, Public Services and Communities Directorate, and in particular the way in which they've been working alongside quite a number of really enthusiastic voluntary groups. There's a lot of community activity in North Halifax, and I think, for example, of the Friends group at Beechwood Park, I think there's a good Friends group at Shrogs Park that's really keen to try to make sure we can get football getting back underway there. There's a number of other initiatives really, and I'm also really pleased to note that although the future of exactly what's going to happen at the Mixenden Activity Centre is still being decided, it's not lying idle. We've got our temporary library in there, and we have actually had some really good healthy holiday activity there as well. So I just really wanted to say that for me, making a difference to what's going on in North Halifax is going to be, as much as anything else, about our officers and elected councillors working alongside local members of the local communities to really kind of try and make a difference. I absolutely echo what's already been said. The focus does tend to be on towns and town centres, and in fact, actually, the communities in Illingworth and Mixenden and Ovenden have got a great story to tell, and I might actually say a little bit more when I come to introduce the cultural strategy report as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. I'll go now to Councillor Riveron and then Councillor Baker. Helen, you first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, obviously, I very much welcome that we brought this report here, the strategic approach to North Halifax, the resetting of a relationship, and the investment in building capacity in North Halifax, all very much to be welcomed. There are a few things I want to comment on, but I hope this is perhaps just in trying to get that consultation, communication engagement bit right, which I think will perhaps, and with that, I think a lot of other things will come right as well. And it's not really about sort of more investment. It is very much about getting that relationship right. So probably three things I want to address, partly about three ways, a little bit about Shrogs Park, and a little bit about the education issues as well. And when I'm talking about consultation, I'd like to say now that whilst I think there are times I'm going to say it is something we could have done better, I know there's also times when we've done it very well, and I'd like to learn from the good practice. For example, you've mentioned the cycleways consultation. I thought that was excellent, and I would like that sort of that genuine engagement, valuing people as stakeholders, to be done across the board, and for us to learn from that. I think, obviously, we know there are a lot of difficult issues about three ways. We know there's not going to be an easy solution. But I think one thing I would like to raise is that I think back it was October 2020, there was a consultation exercise undertaken. And it doesn't seem like this has been referred to in this report. Now, this might be something that picked up a later date. But I think, you know, one of the main things, biggest problems with consultation is overcoming cynicism. And so I think that it's important that that is acknowledged to show that, you know, this is a genuine commitment to consultation. And I think along with that, there has been a lot of concern among the existing tenants and stakeholders about where they fit into this. And again, it's this thing, communication, which I will keep coming back to. I think a lot of what is going on there, as we recover from COVID, you know, the voluntary organisations like Phoenix Shed, like Green Home, they can be part of the solution. They needn't be seen as a problem. So again, I would think it's really important that we do communicate, engage, even when we have nothing new to say. Just make sure people know we're still there and we're still listening. I think another point is around how we engage with the other voluntary organisations. In North Halifax. I mean, we've got a great success story with Forest Cottage and Oscar. And I think if we're looking things like a 3G pitch at three ways, it's important we know how that fits with the pitches that are already available at Oscar, because part of their bids for external funding was the focus on indoor sport at three ways and outdoor sport at Forest Cottage. So again, I think it's important that you know we consult and we do get that right, and nothing that we do in terms of developing a pitch would prejudice or disadvantage anything that's happening at Oscar. I understand all the issues of long-term planning, but I would also hope that, you know, if there is a future perhaps for the sports hall as a social enterprise, some of the capacity building would support some of the groups to actually move this forward. Because as you said, there's already some great things going on. I think I'd also add to that on around Shrogs Park, we've got this, again, this ongoing issue about the pavilion. I think the recent costings, you know, around 170,000, it has come as a bit of an unpleasant shock. Up until now, people have been talking around 12,000 to mend the roof. I don't know if there is a way we can look at sort of, you know, a phased development, essential health and safety work, you know, a phased programme of moving forward on this. Because I think the danger is it's not just about the amount of money. You know, I've been getting sort of messages and emails about this saying, you know, they can't be serious. Where's this coming from? Why has this just come as a bolt from the blue? Which to some people, you know, in the Friends and the Save the Pavilion group, it has. So I think, first of all, I would make sure that we're talking to everybody, even if they don't always like what we're saying, which we won't, and then that we do look at some phased programme. I know Andrew Pitt sent a very constructive email for which I think does suggest a way forward, but I think as soon as possible we need to speak to the groups involved and say this is not the end, it's not this is what will cost, so we're not doing it. It is, yes, we are looking at a phased strategy for the park. And the other thing I wanted to make 2 points around education. One is around the planning of school places, and it's a little bit of a bugbear of mine. Councillor Scullion did allude to the fact that this is mainly about Ovenden, Mixon and Lingworth, but it include a bit of Town Ward. But when we're looking at school places, at the moment, Trinity Academy catchment area extends across Boothtown and Claremont. And the second highest priority actually is pupils who go to Croydon Academy. Now, if we're looking at 1,600 houses generating 300 pupils, and I'd like to look at the rationale for that perhaps in a bit more detail, I would like to, are we actually talking in proposed building in Boothtown and Claremont, because that will obviously impact on the places needed as well, and we could, you know, end up in terms of, you know, if the priority remains the same, it'll still be children on the Upper Mixenden estate who are losing out. So just in terms of projecting, can we look at the whole picture, including, say, the pupils attending from Boothtown and Claremont? And it's often, I think that, you know, planning school places is often better done across the board rather than just in a small area. And the final point I want to raise is about the proposed SEND school. As an authority, we've got a proud tradition on inclusion and integration. We were signatories to the Integration Charter back when I first got on the council over 30 years ago. And I would like to know, what is the rationale now for a new SEND school rather than resource provision in mainstream school? I know there are different views, and I know this is contentious, and I think my main point is this should not be something that just comes on the back of the report. It should be part of a wide report and a wider consideration. In the end, we are preparing all our young people to live well in a mainstream world. And I would always say the provision that's closest to the norm, closest to the mainstream, is the best for all our young people, although I'll always be some who will need, I accept, a discrete provision. But I think we do need to look particularly at what are the arguments for this, what are the options of resource provision, which is the option we've always gone down, and what is the increase in what types of disability and learning difficulties are we looking at, and how that can be best provided for, and an education, young people driven solution rather than a sort of you know, where people will fit, but what is actually the education arguments for this? I said, I think that needs to be, though, a separate paper and a much wider debate. I will end there, Chair. Thank you very much for letting me address the committee. I said there's much to be welcomed here, but I very much, if we get that communication consultation bit back, I think we can really enhance this going forward. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay. Thanks, Helen. I think in view of the range of things you've raised, just on the schools one, I noticed Adam wants to come in. So I think I'll just bring Adam in on that before I come to James. That's okay. Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I may, I also just wanted to touch upon the point made by Councillor Lynn around the Mixenden Activity Centre. And she's right, obviously there were Healthy Holidays activities recently delivered from that building. But it's also worth mentioning that although there has been a bit of a delay in sort of looking at the future of that building, we have now got over half of the council's entire budget for open access youth services is now being spent in North Halifax as well. So I think it's important to remember that point. Just as you say, just to address a couple of the points made by Councillor Rivron, absolutely, as an authority, we do need to consider school places as a whole and across the whole borough, and certainly Boothtown and other parts of Town Ward do need to be part of the picture as well. And I'm happy to ask officers to take another look at those figures that you mentioned. And then just on the special school, I think the point that you've made is a really important one, and it's one that actually I have made to Cabinet colleagues previously when we discussed this, and to our officers in education. I did have the privilege of meeting Tony McCardle, who's the chair of the SEND System Leadership Board, who's leading the national review on SEND. Fairly recently I met him, and he was not giving everything away that was going to be in his review, but suggesting quite strongly that mainstreaming was going to be a big feature of it, and trying to have more inclusion and get more pupils into mainstream education. And I think, wherever that's possible, that is the right thing to do. And I think it's something that we do need to be mindful of, and ensure that we're always doing the right thing for our children and young people. So I think you're right that we do need a bit more detail. I'm sure there'll be more detailed reports and debates on this forthcoming, but I have had assurances up to now from our officers that even with all those things in mind, there will still be a demand for another special school. But perhaps it's something that scrutiny might want to look at in more detail as well. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, Councillor Baker, James, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Swift. So I think when introducing this paper, you correctly identified the problem where by certain areas outside of the town boards, coverage outside of the centre of Halifax, which is covered by the Halifax board, etc., haven't got those mechanisms in place whereby the local communities can develop their own strategic visions, working with partners and the council. Therefore, I guess what I'd like to see is perhaps something that comes forward that includes all of the wards that find themselves in that situation. When we've talked about North Halifax in the past, we've talked about Halifax North and East as a cluster of wards, and we've tended to cluster wards across the borough like that. So you have Upper Valley, Central, Halifax North and East. So in that sense, both Warley Ward and North Arran Shelf are excluded from this ability to participate in that strategic vision for bringing forward capital projects. You have, correctly mentioned there was the European funding that went into the inclusive economy project for Park and Warley, which is really around kind of revenue grants going out to people. There's nothing there in terms of big strategic grants and developing those. So I still think there is a need. Though, there's some good stuff in this paper to the benefit of people in what you're now calling North Halifax. It's not the wider North and East Halifax cluster that is included in that. There's no projects in North Arran Shelf, none here in Warley Ward. So I think some good work here, but I think there's some more to be done in terms of looking at all of those wards across Calderdale that are yet to be covered by a town board, yet to have any mechanism for developing this, and find a way to kind of bring those into these structures. Maybe Warley goes with Park or something, and you develop that steering group into something else, or maybe you look at those clusters in places outside of town boards, or how to do it. But it does need to, I think, be some mechanism in place so it can be community led and involve partners and councillors. So that's the kind of more general point. And of course, there's other wards where there are small pockets of economic deprivation that sometimes get masked when you look at things at the ward level statistics. Just on the particulars contained within the report, just two comments really. One was on housing. There was a lot of mention about kind of new potential housing sites, and that's welcome for North Halifax. I think we also have to bear in mind some of the need for renewal of the existing housing stock as well. Damp properties remains a problem all across North Halifax, where you have that social housing that was built a number of years ago. Some of it sadly isn't fit for purpose. We've seen examples of people living in houses with black mold in them, and that is just really, really shocking in this day and age. So we need to be keeping our eye on the ball with that. Just on the pavilion question, I think it goes back to, you've got another paper looking at the council's assets and the money needed to keep them up to date. It's that point of, stitching time saves 9 if you've got a leaky roof and you need to get on it quickly. Otherwise, what you find are the costs mount up. And I know, there's a number of issues around the council estate at the moment where we do end up, storing up these much larger capital costs because we don't get on top of that kind of maintenance of these assets. So there were kind of my particular comments. Thanks.
Thanks, James, and recognise and understand where you're coming from with some of those. I don't know whether any colleagues want to come back on those at all. Not seeing them particularly. I think some sort of feedback on the inclusion project in Park and Warley, and lessons learned and how we can spin that out a bit more widely would probably be helpful. I think there are some areas of the borough that naturally kind of cluster in ways that others don't. And Councillor, I think Councillor Scullion touched on Boothdown, for example, and that's an interesting challenge of an area that has some deprivation, isn't quite North Halifax, but it's not quite not North Halifax either. So we sort of struggle a bit with how to build that into things as well. But overall, I think the points about social housing and housing condition, some of the challenges there, again, would accept those. I'm not seeing anyone else, so can I check we happy with those comments and provisos about things we need to take forward to ask for these recommendations to be agreed? I'm taking that we are. Okay, thank you very much all. Thank you. And thank you, Councillor River and Councillor Baker. Item 7, health and safety. Calderdale, Sylvia, this is yourself, isn't it?
Yes, thank you. So it's obviously a lengthy report with appendices, so I just want to pick out a few things from it. The recommendations refer to 2 amended policies and 1 new checklist. And the amended policies are the health and safety policy itself, which needed modernising, and the new driving policy brings together items from different policies, puts them all together and tries to basically modernise it all. And then there's a new agile working checklist, which obviously reflects the new ways of working, which have been expedited by COVID, and very thoroughly go through all the things that those working away from offices need to check before we and they can be satisfied that they are working in a safe way. I want to thank the health and safety team for working hard during a very challenging period with all the additional pressures that have been put there by COVID, together with all the routine work, which nevertheless must carry on in health and safety for obvious reasons. And I'm delighted in connection with staffing that 2 of our apprentices have been able to take up permanent opportunities with us. One of them is now the safety and training officer in green space and street scenes, and I'm sure everybody's delighted to see that role filled. So paragraph 5 summarises some of the major areas dealt with during the year, and just ones I'd like to mention the fact that nearly all of these require very close working with colleagues across the council, and unless health and safety do that effectively, it's not going to work, and I think they do it very well. And I'd also like to highlight the fact that they are working commercially when they can, so that, for instance, they sell services to schools, not the community schools, but academies, and that they're doing that both inside and outside the borough, and they're to be commended for that. And I'd also just note the fact that they offered advice to and signposting of resources to elected members in the aftermath of the death of the MP David Amis, to provide reassurance to members and to be there to act if we had questions about our own safety. The report also touches on the health and safety requirements of our buildings, and of course that's something that's picked up in the report later on the agenda about investment needed in them. And finally, they've it's been very challenging providing training, which is again absolutely crucial for members of staff across the council, but health and safety have done their best to keep up with the training and ensure that people were at least getting online training if they couldn't be provided with face-to-face. So the recommendations in the report were to note the contents and approve the 2 amended policy documents and the new checklist. And I'm not quite sure how you want me to word that in relation to the unusual situation today, but I think we can approve and then refer to the Chief Executive. I think that's the appropriate terminology. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sylvia. And as you said, the report captures a huge amount of work, and important that's recognised. I know a number of us have spent some time going through this. So could I just check, are there any other comments or queries on this? In that case, we're happy to receive the report and agree the various recommendations, again subject to for the Chief Exec. Thank you. Item 8 is the cultural strategy, and I'll ask Councillor Lynn to introduce this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Leader. Well, members of Cabinet will remember that on the 4th of October, we got you to approve a draft cultural strategy, and we agreed that we wanted, which was going to go out to consultation, and that has gone out to consultation. And so what we're bringing you back now is the product of that consultation with a wide range of people, and the report itself, the strategy document itself, does go into how we did that consultation. I'm very excited by it. I have to say that I think that the people that we had helping us with that, and particularly 485 Graphics, which is a local company based in Dean Clough, who I hope people will agree have done an absolutely smashing job on making this a really presentable, readable strategy, which I hope people will find really useful. The other people I'd particularly like to thank are Calderdale Creates, which is a body that brings together a number of people involved in the creative industries sector, and they've been kind of key in helping to shape this. So why do we need a strategy? Well, we've already talked in earlier times about in earlier reports about the importance of being able to demonstrate to external funders and so on that you kind of know where you're going. So this strategy really very much tries to say that culture isn't something a long way away from everybody. Culture is about how we live, what we eat, what kind of music we like, what stories we remember from the past, what are the stories that we have in our many communities and so on that we might want to do things with. And it was really interesting. Just before Christmas, I was able to meet with people who were involved in a wonderful history group in Mixenden when I went up to see the reopening of Beechwood Library, and that reminded me very much that in every single one of our communities throughout Calderdale, there are people who love the history, who love the heritage, and who love exploring what that can mean. And there are ways in which that can be the basis for telling stories and strengthening the links between people in our communities. So the report goes into a number of priorities, and the strategy, I should say, goes into a number of priorities there that are both around individuals' access to culture, but also about the importance of supporting. We've got quite a vibrant creative sector here, and we hope very much that this will actually assist with that. Now, the report also looks forward to what's happening in 2024, when Calderdale, the borough of Calderdale, is going to be 50 years old. And as far as we're concerned, and our officer Bob C. Robinson has done a tremendous amount of work on this, we're going to have a year of culture and some exciting cultural activities alongside our communities throughout Calderdale in 2024. We don't do this in isolation, of course, because the Mayor of West Yorkshire, Tracy Brabin, our report, the covering report refers to this, has made it clear that she recognises the really important contribution that our creative industries can make to our regrowth after the pandemic, and to creating jobs and giving opportunities, especially to young people in the borough. So I'm pleased to say that I'm representing Calderdale on that Arts and Culture Committee, and in fact I've got a meeting with Tracy Brabin and other representatives from our West Yorkshire local authorities tomorrow. So I hope very much that people will have had a chance to look at it. It's really kind of the start of a journey. We think it lays down a marker when we're going to try to get funding for some of the activities that we want to be promoting over the next 5 to 10 years. We think it shows that we've got a sense of direction, we know where we're going. So I commend the report and the strategy to members of Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Again, just see if there's any other Cabinet members want to comment at this point. In that case, Councillor Baker, you'd asked to comment on this. Come to you.
Thanks. Yeah, again, there's some really exciting stuff in here, and I think there's a lot to be said for where Calderdale's going in terms of its creative industries, the stories we've got to tell. the place we are. You just see how many people are wanting to film things here. Even in the past couple of weeks, we've had more announcements of people wanting to use this destination because there's just some fantastic backdrops and places that just tell stories of themselves. What I particularly like about this strategy is that focus on the inclusivity about culture being something accessible to everyone. I'm glad, again, you mentioned, Jenny, about visiting somewhere in North Halifax, because I think traditionally in the borough, there's clearly been some towns and areas where there's been a kind of like overfilling of the cup of culture, lots of festivals, lots of events, lots of activities. The Upper Valley, fantastic stuff in Brighouse. There's a lot going on now in Halifax town centre, and that I think has come on recently. I guess that's the bit that I'm really passionate about. How can we extend that to everywhere in Calderdale? So, Tim, you mentioned Boothtown earlier in your ward. What does Boothtown get out of the strategy? What does Pelling get out of it? What does Illingworth? I think that's going to be perhaps the challenge, is how we can engage people in those areas so that they can tell their stories too, and they can participate in that cultural thing. And I think if we could do that, there's a huge untapped potential in the people of Calderdale that we could really tap into, and they've got stories to tell too, and even more important stories. So I don't think, let's not lose sight of that, really engaging everyone and trying to engage people in those places where perhaps there hasn't been as much activity in the past.
Thank you, James. I've seen general nods of agreement with those points. If there's no other on that, then can we again agree that strategy? Thank you all. Thank you. Item 9, green and healthy streets. Councillor Patient, Scott, I think this one's coming to you.
Thank you very much, Leader. So really pleased to present this new strategy, and I think, as sort of alluded to before, it's really prescient that we do it at this moment in time, just as we have our new housing strategy in place and are about to have the local plan adopted at some point in the not so distant future. I think in terms of how we manage it and why it's been done, I think it's important to say that it really marries up with our corporate priorities of tackling the climate emergency, building sustainable towns and reducing inequalities. It's very, very much plugged into the government's LTN 120 aspirations and ours around building active travel and safer and nicer places for people to be and to dwell. And it's important that this is put in place so that when we are managing big corporate projects and big investment into Calderdale, clearly, which is what's happening at the moment, that we are mindful about the people that will be using those spaces and not just considering them in isolation as bricks and mortar. I want to thank specifically people within my directorate, Kat Armstrong and Professor Peter Roberts, who's come in and helped us along this work. And I think you can see, they've done an absolutely sterling piece of work on this, and you can see through some of the consultation work that everyone has been a part of this story and the development of it. The Climate Change Working Party, many officers, voluntary sector people, and everyone kind of in between. So I think we've made sure that we speak to people, that we understand the nuances and priorities that people have. We've made sure that engagement is robust before we've come to Cabinet with it. I think we need to make sure as well, and we need to be really, really clear that although we're doing this, although we are trying to prioritise cycling, walking, making places nicer for people, which in turn will give us positive health outcomes, which is really important to stress. It is green and healthy streets, not just green streets. It's important that Wickr and our partners understand that as well, and perhaps move away from using things that they have done in the past, like journey times as KPIs, and actually thinking about public realm and it not just be us. It's important because Wickr have been key partners with us and will continue to be when it comes to capital schemes. So we really need to make sure that they're on board and they understand what we're asking for, and perhaps use this as a leapfrog and a mechanism for them to do something similar, because I know they take seriously their work on the climate emergency as well. So you'll see within there, I don't want to go too long about it, you'll see some of the kind of key indicators about what we're trying to achieve with it, to make places not too noisy, about safety, about people feeling relaxed, clean air, so that people feel welcome. And we've covered some of this in the cultural strategy. It's so cross-cutting. It's about people wanting to come to Calderdale, to stay in Calderdale, and to go away from Calderdale with good stories to tell. They already do that, but we want to kind of build on that work, I think. So you will see there in section 9 of the report a few recommendations. Now, I am heartily recommending to Cabinet that we go for option 1, which is the adoption of the policy and recommendations in full. I am happy to, I could talk about this all night, Leader, but I'm happy to stop at this point, welcome any potential questions, but there's my recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. I think it's a good piece of work that brings together a number of strands, as you said, and does so clearly cut across some different agendas as well. Yeah, Councillor Dacre.
Yes, thank you. Well, as a cyclist, I clearly do welcome this paper. And I just wanted to say that I was lucky enough to attend a workshop on these topics in Councillor Patience. He was obviously engaged on something else. And it was, well, one of the things that again came out of that, as it comes out of so many meetings I attend with other councillors, is that Calderdale are ahead of many other councils in their progress on this. I think this draft document landed in my email box just as I'd finished the meeting, whereas clearly some councils just haven't even started thinking about it. But really what I wanted to say was that Chris Heaton-Harris, who was at that time involved in this for the government, I think he's been shuffled since, but he gave a little presentation to the workshop, and he was quite adamant that councils really had to make this a priority and get on with it. And what he was saying was that he expected councils to provide these sorts of facilities in their spaces, in their environments, and that the government understood that there would be opposition from people, and that it was absolutely crucial that you got your policies in order and that you set out the evidence that you were going to use to judge these, the things that you're going to do in the streets, so that when you met with when a council met with challenge, it could then say, this is the policy we're following, this is our evidence base, this is what we're judging it against, and in those criteria it's working. And that councils had to be brave and not be frightened, because some of these things will meet with opposition from certain groups. So thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia. Any other questions or comments on this? Anything you want to respond to there, Scott?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as with Councillor Dacre, I'm also a keen cyclist, so I myself welcome this. I think it's important to remember, and this isn't just a anecdotal thing, but when you look at places like Hebden Bridge, they are big meccas for cycling, and you see at the weekend there that they're full of people, and actually the infrastructure around it supports that. The links to the Rochdale Canal, the train station, the very, very welcoming site at the train station, and lots of others besides. I think it's important now we have big capital projects emerging in Halifax, that we think about that in the same terms, because it's actually a rare sight to see cycles pootling in and around Halifax, and I think there's more to be done there. We're clearly a very, very vibrant town and a vibrant borough, and I think we just need to use this to unlock some of the potential in attracting different people to come and visit, to be able to feel secure in moving around how they want to, and also, and I know Councillor Fenton Glynn will endorse this, it actually ties in quite well with the age-friendly aspirations, because it's about people of all abilities and all ages feeling able to dwell in spaces, knowing that they have shelter, and knowing that they're actually safer spaces for everyone to use. So yeah, thank you, Leader. As mentioned before, that recommendation 1 is what I'm going for. So hope Cabinet can endorse that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure if that's what you're moving, I'm happy to second that. Can I see, are we all okay with that? Thank you. Okay, we now come on to two rather detailed and technical reports related to Ellen stations. I probably want to say actually this is really good because this does represent the next steps forward. Now I'll hand over to Jane, Councillor Scullion, and ask you to introduce the report on item 10. Thank you.
Thank you. Detailed and technical are my middle names, Leader. I wonder if you would mind if I took just the introduction to 10 and 11 together, but then clearly we will have to very clearly demarcate the recommendations that are in report 10 and report 11. That's
fine, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The first thing to start with is an apology, in fact, because there's it's online, there is actually a slightly, higgledy-piggledy arrangement of the papers. And the main report for 10 actually starts on page 255 of the papers you've got in front of you this evening. So I just wanted to locate us in terms of paper 10 starts with the covering officer's report on 255. But I wanted to introduce both papers by reminder of things I've said in the previous CPO reports I've brought over the last 2 years. And that is that compulsory purchase order is a strong legal power, and we use it as rarely as we possibly can, because it is actually about the power to deprive somebody of their land and potentially their business that they operate on that land. And we have actually got a very good record in Calderdale of actually having negotiations with landowners for all of the various pockets of land for the schemes that we've had recently, with not having to bring to bear the CPO powers. But nonetheless, we do actually have to take the decision here at Cabinet, and in this case referred on to the Chief Executive for further ratification, to make sure that we have in place the proper legal powers for a compulsory purchase order, and that the reports properly delineate the owners of the land where they are, of course, known, and indeed the places where the land that's being discussed as a possibility for compulsory purchase order, where those pieces of land are, and you have that full detail in the reports in front of you. There are two reports, and I do forgive you if you perhaps in reading it got glazed slightly between them. There are two separate reports because they refer to two different parts of the project to bring Ellen Station to reality. And as you said, Leader, isn't it fantastic that we're finally moving on to the practicalities of making this happen with our partners in the West Yorkshire Combined Authority? The first report, report 10, is about the acquisition of land to enable the road improvements to be made to the A629, including the new spur of the A629 just before Salter Hebble, which is planned will make enormous difference to air quality, queuing time, space for buses, for example, speed of buses, and other objectives we want to achieve. And there are 4 recommendations in that report about the acquisition of land for the road scheme. The second report, report 11, is actually about the acquisition of land for access. Alongside the improvements to the road system, we've also been successful in getting money for improvements to road system, railway and the roads around it. I've got too many CPOs in my inbox at the moment. There's not much point really in having a new station, if the only way of accessing it is by road. And there's a little bit of severance or disconnect between the new Ellen station and the lovely town of Elland in terms of walking and cycling and access. So this report is about ensuring that we actually have the land that we need to ensure access. It includes the construction of a pedestrian bridge. And that's probably why I got confused a moment ago, because of course there is a bridge in the previous compulsory purchase order report I brought to you. This is a new pedestrian bridge which allows people to access Ellen Station and to have car-free access to the new station. And it also links up with Route 66 with the cycleway, so it improves access. You should perhaps have noted in the report that 28% of households in Elland have no access to a car. So actually it has got a much higher level of walking than many other parts of Calderdale. So the pedestrian access to the station, I think, is very important for the future employment prospects and health and well-being and social life of the good people of Elland. There are 7 recommendations in that second report, in report 11. So let me come back to the recommendations in each case. If I can just lay my hand on them. I did actually print them out here, CPO 1. There we are. If members are content, it is recommended for the CPO for the land acquisition for the Ellen Station, that 3.1, the council approves the purchase of the land specified in Appendix A through negotiation if possible, of course. That 3.2, that the Cabinet approves the making of a CPO in the form set out in Appendix A and B, and that the Cabinet approves the publication of the statement of reasons of why this land must be bought in the form set out in Appendix C when notifying parties in the making of the CPO. And 3.4, the final recommendation in Report 10, is that delegated authority be given to the Director of Regeneration and the Head of Legal and Democratic Services in consultation with the portfolio holder for regeneration to submit the CPO maps and statement of reasons to the Secretary of State and progress confirmation so as to deliver the scheme. So that's the report 10 that's in front of you tonight, Cabinet, and I'm proposing that we agree those recommendations for the land acquisition for the Ellen Station scheme, first of all.
Thanks, Jane. I think because CPOs are always potentially legally tricky, we probably need to just make sure that the way this is worded and minuted is absolutely correct. So I suspect what we're probably doing is saying that Cabinet is content with those proposals, but it's a matter for the Chief Exec to then consider all factors in determining whether to act on them or not. I'm looking to Ian, and I don't know if Ian wants to suggest any any other wording than that.
No, Lead, I think you've summed up the position. Cabinet's indicating its view of the matters before it. It is not taking a decision on any of those matters, but passing them over to the Chief Exec based on all the factors that he will have heard this evening to subsequently take a decision under delegated authority.
Thank you. So having clarified that's what we're doing, are there any questions or comments for Jane on these on the report and the detail there on item 10? So can I check Cabinet are content with that? Thank you. And item 11, Jane, you just want to highlight recommendations there.
Yes, CPO 1, CPO 2. CPO has got 7 recommendations, which I will find in a second. Statement of reasons. Right. Recommended that the Council approves the purchase of the land specified in Appendix A. Cabinet approves, the Cabinet approves the making of a CPO to enable the acquisition of the land. That delegated authority be given as previously. And 3.4, Cabinet approves the making of side roads orders, SROs, and you will remember these from previous decisions that sometimes in terms of purchasing land, making changes to roads, there's a need for adjustment of the side roads. 3.5, that Cabinet approves the making of a scheme or schemes in respect of bridges over navigable waters, in this case a pedestrian bridge, and that Cabinet serve notice of the intention to carry out works on a navigable watercourse on the grounds that the carrying out of the works is necessary or desirable in connection with the construction, improvement or alteration of highway. And then finally, that Cabinet approves the temporary underwriting of costs associated with these land purchases prior to them being reimbursed by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Again, let's check if there are any questions or comments on those. Okay, in that case, we can indicate that we're content with that. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, item 12. This is disposal form of Sawbury Bridge Youth and Community Centre at Foundry Street in consideration of ward member objection. So, Jane, I'll ask you to introduce this item, and then Councillor Smith has asked to come and speak to her objection on this one. So I'll bring in her after you've introduced the item, if I may.
Thank you, Leader. And this report, item 12 on the agenda, relates to a building which is referred to as Foundry Street in Sawbury Bridge. It is a rather fine building in a town that has many fine and handsome buildings. It's slightly complicated or anomalous, and I'll explain why and how it comes to be on your agenda tonight. The building is not part of the previous reports which have come to Cabinet about the changes relating to the office accommodation strategy, which of course involve the council rationalising its estates in relation to office accommodation, partly due to the pandemic and working from home, partly due to digitisation of many processes. But the office accommodation strategy covered those things, and Cabinet looked at that. Cabinet also looked in recent times at what was called the Future Council programme, which looked at the service delivery aspects of the corporate estate and identified changes and again rationalisations to particular buildings. This report is in front of you because it sits outside of those two major programmes of buildings rationalisation. This building was within the remit of the Children and Young People's Directorate, and their main use was for open access services, and other organisations hired it. A restructure meant that Children and Young People's Services no longer needed that building, and the process within our facilities asset management department basically offers it to other services who may need a building, and if it's not needed, then it moves to disposal. The process means that ward members have got to be informed as to whether they have any objections to that, and Councillor Audrey Smith, as you mentioned, did actually raise an objection, which meant it had to come here for a decision. And here we are with the officers' options in the report to don't approve and leave things as they are, to offer as a community asset transfer, or option 3 to approve the disposal and to sell the building or rent it or do whatever. I don't know, Leader, if you want to hear Councillor Smith at this point, or if you'd like me to finish my presentation to members of the Cabinet in terms of what my my own preferences in relation to recommendations and why. I don't know how you want to handle this particular part of this item.
Right. Well, let's hear from Councillor Smith, and then you come back with on that. So, Councillor Smith, Audrey, over to you.
Hello. Thanks. Yeah, I'd kind of like to hear what Jane's going to say, actually, then I can adapt. Right, yeah, thanks for listening. I come here objecting to the proposal to get rid of Foundry Street. There's been a petition put online, and there are now 1,264 signatures as of this afternoon. I was approached by Sheila Eastwood some time ago, who is the leader of the karate club that's been running classes out there for quite a long time. And her and I had a meeting with a few other members from the karate club, and we felt at the time that a community asset transfer would be a huge ask. However, since then, and since the petition, we have had such a huge amount of community support that I'd really like to ask Cabinet to consider that. In fact, I've got two suggestions. I would like them to consider the asset transfer, but in the meantime, would they be able to look at something that they have been talking about earlier, looking about a cross-directorate resource, maybe partly funded through CYP and through Adult Health and Social Care, to fund a community and youth centre that the voluntary sector could work from. The centre was closed during COVID and not reopened, and it was deemed surplus to requirements because of the restructuring youth services. But that's left Levy Bridge without any youth services. Apparently there are some outreach sessions, but people aren't very aware of those. And I think that was the problem in the first place with the youth service that was run from the centre. The report that I read prior around from CYP was around the youth services, said that the voluntary sector would pick up some of this youth work. However, the voluntary sector needs somewhere to deliver these activities, and some of the groups that have been coming forward as a result of this petition and the interest shown in the centre have been saying, you know, we need somewhere to offer our services. In principle, the karate club, which does have services for young people. It is true they have been temporarily given some space at the leisure centre. The leisure centre is quite expensive and it is at capacity. We're also looking to close North Bridge in the future, so that's going to put more pressure on services. We have quite a few church buildings, but they also really expensive, and they do not offer the unique facilities that Foundry Street offer. In particular, is our the sprung floor in the upper room. I've had quite a few letters from residents about it, and one in particular is about the SEN provision, which was a specialist provision. It wasn't an open access provision that youth services provided. It says, I have an autistic son who regularly went to the community centre every Monday, who misses the place that much, as he has high anxiety levels running into issues which I as a parent then have to deal with. Yes, it was small. It was a small but necessary group to the young people with various mental issues, which gave them space in which they could enjoy and play out their thoughts. It also gave the parents of these children some respite. Since it was closed, they were allocated a place, the Orange Box, situated adjacent to the Peace Hall, a very impressive large building. It's huge inside, but not the environment for these children. Not the environment these children liked. Subsequently, numbers dropped. I think that just it says that it was a valued resource, and I think a lot of people are making that comment that they did use the centre and would have used it more. It wasn't just youth; it was older people too. There was over 50s and coffee mornings, and there were also community consultations held there. I mean, I myself went along to a consultation on the SIP, and used to go to together housing consultations there. The cost of running the centre last year was estimated in the report as £12,000. Sheila's put together a bit of a business plan and reckons that even at sort of 50% capacity, charging a reasonable, affordable hourly rate, we could, don't yawn, Sheila, that we could cover up to about £20,000 per annum. With these points in mind, I'd be grateful if Cabinet would halt the idea of a disposal of the building and look into the suggestion of possibly an asset transfer, but opening with immediate effect for the next 18 months while that goes ahead, funded by whichever directorate feels they could make the sacrifice, but with the support of the community to try and cover those costs. So it would be it would not cause a loss for the council, because I do understand that we are short of cash. But I think taking this resource out of Sorby Bridge would be very unfair, and I think we could make it work to the benefit of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Jane, do you want to come back on that before I come to Councillor Wilkinson? Yeah, so back to you.
Thank you, and thank you to Councillor Smith for a very comprehensive and well delivered and impassioned plea for the people of those organisations of Sorby Bridge. I myself met with community representatives and indeed the councillors, and as I say, this was outside the two other big buildings programmes that we have been involved in. So as I say, it's a bit anomalous in terms of standing by itself in terms of consideration. And following those meetings, I have formed the view that we should actually give the groups in Sorby Bridge some further time in the way that we have around the library, Heptonstone Museum, other buildings which were part of the Future Council programme, that we should actually give the local organisations the opportunity to explore whether an asset transfer is viable. It may be, it may not be. Councillor Smith's enthusiasm was very compelling. Now, the officers are, and rightly, because they have to give us what they see as best advice in terms of what's legal, what's financially sound. They've put in a recommendation that we should dispose of the building. And I want to put it to the cabinet members who are here on this call tonight, that actually we go for option 2, and that we agree to explore the possibility of a community asset transfer. I would like to suggest that we have a similar set of conditions to those that were in the library Future Council buildings, where there's a reasonable amount of time for expression of interest, rather than having the building sitting there and in 5 years' time. So proposing that it should be treated the same way as the other buildings, such as libraries and the museum, and that we give the organisations time for community asset transfer. And I think my rationale is that we have recently been through this experience in terms of the Future Council report buildings, and that it seems only fair and just to allow this group to have a very similar experience to those involved in those other buildings. And the other thing is, of course, the council cannot do everything at the moment. These groups often have access to funds that are simply not available to the council at the moment. So it may be that the building would have a better future with a community organisation because of the access to funds. So for those reasons, I'm asking Cabinet if they would be prepared to explore option 2 rather than go for the recommendation to dispose. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jane. Right, Councillor Wilkinson, and then Councillors Lynn and Dacre.
Thank you, Chair. I won't speak for too long because I think Councillor Smith's made most of the points I would have made myself, and I think if Councillor Scullion and Cabinet are minded to allow the exploration of an asset transfer, then that would be really welcome. We've already had a number of meetings among interested parties about the future of the building and all the different groups that are interested in it. And I've also been in touch with locality this week, who have supported other groups across the borough with their asset transfers. And if this meeting goes the way that us as the ward councillors are hoping it will, Cassandra from locality has agreed to meet us in the coming days to sort of talk people through sort of exactly what's involved. And you know, it may be that it comes to nothing when everybody sort of here's exactly what's involved, and it comes to putting together an expression of interest or a business plan. But I think at least to afford the interested parties the same sort of process that other groups around the borough have been afforded when we've looked to dispose of other buildings, I think that would be only fair. So thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Adam. Jenny?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Smith, for bringing this forward. I'd also like to thank, I think it was Sheila Eastwood who wrote a really comprehensive email to us recently, setting out some of the ideas that have come forward from local people. I mean, it's funny, isn't it, really, how sometimes good things come out of bad, really, and that it may very well be that the threat of withdrawing Foundry Street, Foundry Street no longer being available as the community centre, which Mr. Godfrey fought hard for all those years ago, that has kind of galvanised people. The fact that there's over 1,200 people have signed a petition, but more impressive than that to me is the fact that there are so many other groups and organisations are saying that they would like to do something to offer new facilities and new things to benefit the community and young people and the karate club and so on and so forth. So I was kind of quite excited when I read all about that. I know it's going to be difficult, but I have to say, as somebody who's was involved in the Future Council report and in subsequently working with Sarah Richardson and colleagues on trying to bring forward facilitate discussions about the community asset transfers for the former libraries. I've been really impressed with how those discussions have gone, and I think there's every reason to hope that this could be the making of Foundry Street, because you've got quite a lot of people who are saying yes, we'd really like to do things. It's not easy, but Cassandra from Locality and there are other organisations, the Voluntary Sector Infrastructure Partnership and so on, who can assist with if bodies need to be properly constituted and all the rest of it. So I would like to say that I very much, although I understand, as Councillor Scullion has said, why officers who have to have consideration for what would seem to be the most appropriate route for us. At the time when that recommendation was made, I mean, in some senses, we didn't know that many of us did not realise the groundswell of support that there was for Foundry Street, the affection that there obviously is for it, and people who've been there, in their youth and all the rest of it. And so officers were quite correct to bring forward the recommendations that they have done. But I'm very happy to support the recommendation from Jane that we go with option 2. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Sylvia?
Yes, thanks. Well, yes, I think, as Adam said, I think it's only fair, and I think Councillor Scullion said the same, it's only fair to afford the same opportunity to people in this case as we did in all the other cases where we were thinking of, we were no longer wanting to use buildings. The thing about option 2 is at the moment it's silent on what will happen to the building in the meantime while that's being considered. There's been a request made to us to effectively open it up again. And I think that that's something that would have to be considered extremely urgently if option 2 is adopted, because it's not what happened in the case of the other buildings. They remained closed, so I don't know whether that could be accommodated, but it will have to be considered.
Okay, thank you. So I'm getting a general consensus from, sorry, Adam, you want to come back?
Sorry, yeah, it was just on that point, actually. I can't really say too much about it at the moment, other than have had some discussions with the Director of Children's Services about how we might be able to reopen it in partnership with all I can say is another organisation within the community. It's in very early stages at the moment, but if we could, I think that would be desirable, because obviously we don't want the building to be left just vacant, potentially being vandalised for a period of up to 2 years. So it is early stages, but we are looking at what we can do on that.
Okay, thanks for that, Adam. So I think given that we are expressing a view rather than taking a decision, I think the clear consensus is that we would wish to see option 2 pursued rather in line as Sylvia said, really for consistency, as much apart from anything else, with what's been done with the other buildings affected by the Future Council programme. And I'm sure that opens up the opportunity to explore whether any meanwhile uses of the kind Adam, Councillor Wilkinson set out are possible or not. Does that accurately reflect Cabinet's consensus on this? Seeing nods, thank you. Thank you. So that concludes that item. 13, corporate estate investment. Jane, I think that's you again.
Thank you. I have actually got my notes from this, and they have, I think, disappeared under compulsory purchase order papers. But let me move on to the item. The main thing that the item is about is, of course, continues our previous discussion about the council's estate, the buildings which it has, and it's laying out the implications from service priorities, particularly in relation to health and safety. And I can't remember who it was who said earlier, I think it was Councillor Baker, was talking earlier about the difficulty of finding money for maintenance so that you kept things going, and the difficulty when you then came to things that had been neglected and then needed a higher investment. What you've got in the report in front of you sets out the items which actually do need essential maintenance, essential attention in relation to health and safety. And there are also proposals or descriptions in the report of other things that might need to be attended to sooner rather than later. That includes where there are issues to do with meeting our climate change objectives, and issues where we need to basically take steps one way or another to improve the states of the building. And as the report says, we ask for business cases to be brought forward for each of those other projects. But the main thing within the report is making sure that our buildings are safe for our employees and safe for the public who use those buildings. And you will see that the recommendations are that Cabinet approves option 2, detailed in paragraph 7.2 of the report, and recommends, and this is crucial because of course it relates to the forthcoming budget, that 2.6 million be added to the Council's capital programme for the essential health and safety works required to be funded by prudential borrowing. That's in 3.1 in the report. And that means that 169,000 revenue funding will be required to service the borrowing, and that needs to be added to the Council's revenue budget. 3.3, the resultant investment to be monitored through the CAFM Asset Management Advisory Board. And the 3.4, the building strategic reviews referred to in paragraph 5.5 are noted to be brought forward throughout the year, and it may be that we will have some other monies during the year that they can be brought forward for due consideration. And that finally, separate business cases, particularly for the carbon reduction schemes referred to in the report as priority 2, be brought forward for approval by Cabinet and Council when available. And then I think that's it for the recommendations 3.1 to 3.5. So I commend the report to you.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Councillor Lynn.
Thank you. Yes, I'd just like to say I welcome this report, and I'd like to commend the work that officers in CAFM have done on this. I think it's been a very comprehensive examination of both the maintenance requirements, but also thinking about the opportunities to decarbonise and so on. I wish very much that we could do, we could spend a lot more than Councillor Scullion is proposing on the sort of the minimum because the amount that we're allocating here is really to meet the most urgent health and safety requirements. But at least the point is, this is a framework, and in the event of there being opportunities, who knows from where, if government decides to give us some extra money that we didn't know was coming our way, then we've got the framework on which we can build in the information provided in this report. So I'm very happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Sylvia?
Well, just to say that, yes, I think an enormous amount of work has gone into this, and great credit to those who carried out the review. But in fact, of course, the next item on the agenda is an example of where we have been able to look at one of the priority 2 options. That's in relation to the Todmorden Leisure Centre and swimming pool and a decarbonisation opportunity. But I think really it's absolutely crucial that Cabinet keeps on top of this now that this paper has been brought, and we do ensure that the individual papers come forward and that we use this as the starting point of a more strategic consideration of how we deal with priority 2 and 3 in the future, to avoid really finding ourselves in a position where things have got to a state where really they shouldn't have done.
Thanks, Sylvia. Scott?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, and just to, I think, and I know this was said before, but just to give it a bit of credit to Alan Lee on the work that's been done on this. I think what's really, really good is we've got officers from all across the council that are really taking the climate emergency seriously, and they're embedding it into all of these reports. And I think actually a lot of the reports we've seen tonight reflect some of that working. Now, I appreciate it goes much broader than that, and I'm talking within my directorate, but I just think it's a really sort of pleasing sign of the direction that we need to go in, and actually helps us achieve some of those goals. I'll just note as an aside, a question earlier, and a question to council earlier on had a list of pros and cons of things that we aren't doing, and actually the cons list was only the pros were only a few things. Actually, there's stuff going on all across the council at the moment that didn't feature in that list, and that's a bit of a shame. So really like this. I think it's an excellent piece of work and really recommend it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So noting that our ability to implement this will of course depend on decisions taken at Budget Council. Cabinet content with the recommendations in that report? Yes. Thank you. Okay, item 14 is titled Public Phase 3 Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, Todmorden Sports Centre. Scott, can I ask you to introduce this one?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, and quite a nice, handy little segue there. Not that I planned that at all. Just to say, and I know Councillor Dake will be really pleased with this. This is to move that the council seek approval from Cabinet to support this bid, which is phase 3 of the public sector decarb scheme. For it's getting on for 2,001,726 as part of a sort of larger 2 million plus scheme. Now, why we need recommendation here today is, and for those unaware, we do have a long and successful relationship with Salix, who've been delivering this public decarb scheme back in the days when Rob Bayliss was still with the council, who we still get to chew the fat with at the Climate Change Working Party, and is a real advocate for all things green and across Calderdale. We need to make sure that we add 350,000 of prudential borrowing to make sure this scheme happens. And this is the third such major scheme we can potentially deliver with Salix. We've already done refit, which members and viewers may be aware is the retrofit of all of the lights across Calderdale towards LEDs, which has been a massive financial saving, as well as huge tons and tons of carbon benefits for the borough. And we're actually currently going through phase 2, where we're delivering air source and ground source heat pumps across lots of the corporate estate, including the town hall, Banksfield Museum, lots of other places. So this is the third potential scheme that we can deliver. What it intends to do is deliver heat pumps, which are over £1 million. Todmorden sports centre was looked at in terms of the estate and considered a front runner in terms of public sector decarb, because it's potentially reaching near end of life. Not quite there. I think there's life in the old dog yet, but it was identified as such. And as such, Laura Bramley, who definitely deserves word of recognition for all her work, as well as colleagues in CAFM, really need lauding for the work that's been done on this. We do keep attracting that capital funding. We have an excellent relationship with Salix, and I think it's actually the start of an ongoing relationship in terms of being able to navigate these quite tight and stringent government-led timescales. What they do, and it's been alluded to earlier, is you have very small amount of scope time. These are potentially quite big capital bids, but you have a very small amount of time to bid and then deliver on them. So as part of that, we're delivering heat pumps, a PV array. We're replacing the life expired sand filters with microfiltration, which also, so basically all of it is delivering massive carbon savings. It's going to be around 6% of the whole corporate estate. What we're asking is that basically we support the grant application for that 1.726, that we match it with the 350k of our own prudential borrowing to make it happen. And that, basically that's why we've come here. We need cabinet approval, so that's going to be required so that we can spend the grant. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Sylvia, then Josh.
I think it was the other way around, but I was a light-hearted comment, really. It's that obviously I am delighted as ward member for Todmorden that the pool is being considered for this, and but really I think it was when I was reading this, when I was reading the paper, the CAFM paper, where it said that these things at the swimming pool were life expired, and I realised that it seemed no time at all to me since the swimming pool was built, and yet here it is with life expired parts, and you start thinking about, oh dear, what does that say about how old I'm getting and when I'm going to be life expired? But nothing more serious than that to say.
Thanks, Sylvia. Josh.
If it helps, it still feels like the new swimming pool to me, but that's because I used to go to my my swimming classes at primary school at the old one. So I think that very specifically ages me. I just think this is a great scheme, but also I think one thing that's worth underlining is that we often hear talk about climate change and kind of the changes that we make because of climate change as if they're a zero-sum game. And actually this isn't that. And this is exactly the kind of stuff that we need to be talking about and getting people excited about, like the cycling infrastructure. It's that we're adding more and we're replacing with better. It's going to save money in the long run, and it's going to, it's going to reduce our carbon footprint. And there's so many choices like that we get to make. And I think, it's really exciting to see it be delivered. And I'd like to thank Councillor Patient and all the officers for their leadership in that as well.
Okay, thank you. So can I check cabinet consensus is that this is a proposal we would support? Thank you. That's agreed. Item 15 is relating to the letting of the farmhouse at Jerusalem Farm and some maisonettes at Crown Street, Hebden Bridge. This is the item that Councillor Scullion declared an interest in. So I'll ask Councillor Patient to introduce this. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. And I'm just going to caveat this item by saying we are not selling Jerusalem Farm. We had to have quite stern words with the Halifax Courier for misrepresenting this paper. So I just want to say it's not the farm for anyone that still harbours those misconceptions. This is a paper about the proposal to let part of the council owned land at Jerusalem Farm and some maisonettes on Crown Street, Hebden Bridge, to the Calder Valley Community Land Trust. They're one of our brilliant registered providers, volunteer-led, and just recently they do have a paid member of staff running things, but they've got a fantastic portfolio of works already. Incredible older living properties in Walsden, and they're currently doing work on the station, on the signal box in Hebden Bridge, as well as a scheme in on High Street in Hebden Bridge as well. What they're proposing is that they bring Jerusalem Farm, the farmhouse there, and these maisonettes back into use for people to live and live good lives in vibrant Hebden Bridge and in the beautiful Luddenham Valley and Booth, where Jerusalem Farm is located. So what we hope they will deliver, and I think what we're aware and keen to see them do, is to breathe life into those places. Calder Valley Community Land Trust are an established registered provider of social housing, and their mission statement is to work with the people of the Calder Valley to hold property and create sustainable and affordable homes in vibrant communities. I know actually that they take, and this links to some of our other items, that they take sustainability and the climate emergency very seriously. I know that they accessed some of the £1 million climate funds that we're using with that we've developed with Community Foundation to do some work on how to better retrofit homes, and I know that's going to be key to delivering the Crown Street site. As members and viewers may be aware, we do have a number of empty properties in and around the borough, and that is, you know, not a great thing, and we need to make sure that we work on getting those full and that people are able to live in decent, energy efficient and vibrant properties. So you'll see the options considered, the financial implications, and there are basically nothing. What we will gain is council tax receipts for those places, and we'll also have people living in beautiful locations that hopefully they can call their homes for time to come. So bring this recommendation to council, to cabinet, please, and ask that you agree to the terms of the leases with CVCLT, and that you give the Director of Regen and Strategy and Head of Legal and myself the ability to release that. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Colleagues, are there any questions or comments on this item? As you said, it's had some coverage because of the unfortunate courier story. So I think a lot of us have had a bit of a look at the background of this, certainly as far as Jerusalem Farm, and to emphasise this is a positive move to bring a building into use. So in that case, again, is it our consensus that is something we would all support? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, so we now come on to a number of reports which deal with setting the budget and therefore effectively will form part of the budget proposals towards the end of February. There's a mix of background papers, and then I'll introduce the Cabinet's budget proposals for consultation. So item 16 deals with the calculation of the council tax base, and I'll ask Sylvia to introduce that.
Yes, thank you, Leader. So yes, this is the first of the 4 papers laying the foundation for the Cabinet budget proposals, and it's a very dry paper because it provides the technical calculation which the council officers must undertake to set the council tax base, so that is ready for when the budget is set at Budget Council. And it takes into account not only the number of properties together with an allowance for new properties, but also the number of properties that get the single person discount and those in people in receipt of council tax reduction. And it also includes an assumption about the collection rate, which has been set next year at 97.5%. Obviously, the council will always aim to recover as much as possible, but that's the rate that's been set at the moment. And the council tax for Calderdale has been set at 62,507.11, and that is an increase on last year, which is good news. And that figure will clearly be used in the budget papers later. So the recommendation of the paper was that the Cabinet approved the calculation of the tax base, including the grants to the parish councils, which are also set out in the paper for the year 22-23, and the council tax base area for the whole borough and the parts of the borough that don't have town or parish councils.
Thank you, Sylvia. Are there any questions on that? I suspected not. In that case, are we content with that paper? Thank you. Item 17 is the City Region Business Rates Pool proposal. Again, Sylvia.
Thank you. So this, for those who don't know, just very quickly, since 2013-14, we've been part of the Leeds City Region Business Rates Pool, the advantage of which is if those areas which would normally have to pay a levy on their business rates, they can then effectively pool the money that would have gone to the government on that levy, they can pool it amongst the remaining members of the pool, and so they benefit and the others benefit as well. There is a risk if business rate income falls below a certain threshold, but all the councils have looked at this and decided that despite COVID, they believe that business rates will remain above that threshold, and therefore it's in the interests of all the councils in the pool to continue. So the pool has been effectively entered into, and if we were now to withdraw, the whole pool would collapse. And so it's not recommended that we do that because we think there is more likely to be a benefit than there is a risk. And so again, the recommendation is that Cabinet confirms the Council's participation in the Leeds City Business Rate Pool for 2022-3.
Okay, thank you. Again, just checking for any comments on that. And in that case, can I check Cabinet's content? Thank you. And item 18, more significant, the general fund forecast, Sylvia.
Yes, thank you. So this is in effect an update to the medium-term financial strategy, which Council agreed in November of last year. And before we move to the budget, our Head of Finance provides an update on the forecasts that were in that strategy. And that's particularly because we've now had the Chancellor's spending review and the provisional local government finance settlement. And so this forecast or MTFS update can also be referred to as the standstill budget, if you hear that term. And it provides the basis for our consultation budget proposals as a Cabinet and also any subsequent proposals put forward by other parties. So it notes that the provisional settlement was better than expected when the MTFS was drafted, but that it still doesn't reflect all the spending pressures being experienced in local government, and it relies upon an increase in local taxation. So in other words, an increase in council tax and therefore an increase on tax on our residents. And unfortunately, cost pressures in local government are continuing to rise, and the updated MTFS takes that into account, particularly in relation to energy costs, which are going to go up for the council just as they are for individuals. So extra provision has been made for that. And the updated position, therefore, is that there would be a budget deficit of £1 million next year, rising to £3.8 million by 24-25, and that is assuming that we do raise the council tax by the maximum allowable without a referendum. So the recommendation is that members note the forecast as part of the budget process, but also, and importantly, that they agree to maintain the underlying level of unallocated balances at a 5 million or above over the period of the MTFS. This is a topic that's covered in detail in the report, and it's in line with the external audit recommendations as well as that of the Head of Finance.
Thank you, Sylvia, for that summary of this. I just think it's important to remind people effectively that as we build up the budget throughout the year, there are 3 papers which effectively change spending from this year's budget. The first is the MTFS itself, which, for example, built in some of the budget and cost pressures around adult social care as one example, and some of the others. The second is this paper, which looks at the assumptions in the MTFS and fine tunes them. Both of those make changes before we get onto the actual budget proposal itself, which talks more narrowly about savings and growth, and which we'll come on to in a moment. Are there any other questions or comments on this paper, which again will form the basis going forward. In that case, can I take it, colleagues, that we're content with the direction of travel set out in that? Thank you. And that takes us to item 19, which is the capital and investment strategy. Sylvia again.
Yes, thank you. So this is a report which brings together the council's capital strategy, its investment strategy, its treasury management policy, and the minimum revenue provision policy, and also our prudential indicators in one document. These are all documents which we are required to have as a council, and so it's absolutely necessary that they are prepared every year. And I really don't think anybody wants to hear anything more about them at this stage, other than that the recommendation is that we recommend these to council, and as they're set out in the report, and that we also recommend to council operational boundaries and authorised limits for external debt for the years 22, 23, 23, 24 and 24, 25.
Thank you, Sylvia. So said these form recommendations to council. Again, are there any questions on those? In that case, thank you. Let's just see there's consent to those. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us on then to the cabinet budget proposals for consultation. As members will be aware, if we were meeting physically, these are normally circulated with a great flourish at this point, instead of which I will ask Nigel to send them out by email. This is the start of a consultation process for 4 weeks, but also a process where members will have the opportunity to comment and question and bring forward alternatives at the various scrutiny panels. So rather than cover every detail of them tonight, I'll sort of build on what Sylvia's already introduced and set out the kind of main themes. So the budget proposals for consultation are built around a number of priorities. The first of which is the continuing need to keep Calderdale safe and to make sure that we're able to respond resiliently to the pandemic, and that we continue to be well placed to lead the recovery. The second is the importance of protecting vital services, and that includes, as I've touched on already, providing for the growing demand in adult services, keeping our track record of strong support for our children with robust early intervention, and maintaining realistic caseloads for our social workers so we can continue to protect children at risk. I think we've seen from other examples elsewhere in the country just how important it is that we don't let our vision slip on that, and that we do maintain strong services in that area. Thirdly, in avoiding the need for further cuts to the front line. And then finally, investing in a small number of important priorities, and that includes working with our waste provider to address the challenges caused by Brexit, the driver shortages and COVID. And you'll see there's a proposal in there we've agreed, which is targeted funding to particularly to raise driver wages and make sure we can put the service on a sound footing for next year. And then 2 or 3 important, not necessarily exciting for people out there, but absolutely critical proposals in terms of our service. One of which we touched on already is the issue of funding the capital funding for the investment in keeping our buildings robust and safe. Another element of which is some further investment in IT infrastructure. And again, I think the last 2 years have shown how critical IT services are for local authorities in being able to respond resiliently to different challenges and continue to provide services. Those changes take place against the context of a still challenging national position. The national settlement really doesn't make any start on restoring the massive cuts that we've seen in funding for local services since 2010, and that cumulative figure is now around £120 million. The second concern is that once again we're left with a 1-year settlement. So although as a whole the government's agreed a 3-year spending review, the settlement for local government is only 1 year, and that leaves us with needing to make assumptions and with some substantial uncertainties for the future. And thirdly, that as Sylvia already mentioned, it continues to place the burden for funding social care on council tax, which, as we know, is not a particularly fair and effective way of funding a service. And what we really need is a funding mechanism that links need to that links the availability of funding to demand. And clearly this policy of a random 1% on council tax really doesn't do that. But we do see that there is really no alternative for the council but to use the social care levy to help towards the costs of the increased cost of adult care. And as I mentioned previously, the MTFS already provides effectively for something like £10 million of planned growth in adult social care spending over the next 3 years to fund demographic growth and the higher cost pressures in that area. And clearly not to use the social care precept towards that would mean we would then have to risk not being able to adequately fund social care at a time when it is under more pressure than ever, and at a time when also it is critical to our colleagues in the NHS that we provide as full a social care service as we can. There are a number of savings identified in the budget proposals to balance those items of growth. And what we've tried to do in those is focus very much on areas where there are genuine possibilities for efficiencies or value for money in the way savings are delivered, or where there are good opportunities for reduced spending. And that's particularly the biggest single saving is on pensions contribution, where the excellent performance of the West Yorkshire Pension Fund over the past year provides the opportunity for lower contributions. So those are some very brief headlines. As I've said, this is the start of a consultation process. I know there'll be a lot more debate and discussion on this, and I won't take up too much of your time presenting this tonight, as well as the detailed papers. Of course, the budget document does include quite a lengthy summary of the background and the reasons for the proposals. So that's the budget we're commending for consultation, and I will just check whether colleagues have anything they want to add to the proposals at this point. Yes, Sylvia.
Well, really, it was just to expand on firstly to expand on one of the comments that you made about it being a one-year settlement. And this isn't a party political point. It was a point that was made by the Conservative leader of the LGA at the local government finance meeting last week, that this is the 4th year in a row that government has handed down one-year settlements to local authorities. And he and I think all parties just keep pleading with government to recognise that local councils and their residents need some certainty if they are to plan for the future. And it makes it really difficult when we only get the 1-year indication. However, as has been indicated, we have prepared a 3-year budget, and we feel that that's because despite only having a 1-year settlement and despite the uncertainties around COVID and inflation, it was crucial that we attempt to plan for the future. And in the budget proposals, you'll see the plans that we have, but also the assumptions that have been made in arriving at that 3-year budget. And clearly it is risky, and if any of those assumptions turn out to be underestimates or overestimates, then things will change, and it's quite likely that they will. But we did feel that it was very important that we did what we could to plan. And I think perhaps if I can say at this stage, obviously, I don't think Councillor Swift actually moved on to say that obviously the budget is now out for consultation, and I plead this to anybody that I meet, or not meet, but speak to over Zoom, or that really we do want people to look at this and to respond to it. All I'd say is that when you are, if you do respond, finances are extremely challenging for local authorities, and unfortunately, as you will see from the proposals, we can only support further revenue spending by making cuts elsewhere. So any proposals that we spend money on something that we aren't already doing would require us to cut something else. And that's the dreadful decisions that we're forced into at the moment. And I'd just ask you, anybody who does comment on the budget, to bear that in mind. Thank you.
Sorry, let me try again. So thank you, Sylvia. Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to speak for too long because I think I'm kind of echoing quite a lot of Sylvia's sentiments about when we're looking at this budget, it, you know, kind of coming to the conclusions when there were no easy options and no easy decisions to be made. And I'd really urge everyone who is looking at it not to lament proposals that we've made without alternatives. And, you know, I look forward to people bringing forward alternative proposals, even though it's a lot of work, because ultimately that's how, you know, that's how we can have an informed debate. Otherwise, you're just complaining that it's opposition for opposition's sake, and none of us want to see that. We want to see a constructive discussion for what we can do, how we can do what's best for Calderdale within the very limited resources we've been provided.
Thanks, Josh. So not seeing any other cabinet members to comment, and so this is the start of a consultation process. So I just checked formally, we're happy to consent to that as our consultation budget. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Adam, for demonstrating why you need paternity leave. She doesn't have a vote, I'm afraid. Thank you. Okay, that concludes the public items on the agenda, but we do have the confidential item